Splitting Headache. Written and narrated by Mountain Eyes of Mountain Eyes Narrations, and originally posted under the name Phantasmal Poppy. When I was in high school, I had a friend whom we'll call Terry. For those of you that tuned in to the story of Mysterious Motorcycle, yes, this is the same person who relayed that tale. Unlike myself, Terry did not grow up in the Appalachians. In fact, her early life began way up in Michigan, quite a ways away from the forested hills and tall mountains of my home region. When I was staying over at her house one summer afternoon, we began discussing how different houses felt. My mother's house looked nice, but felt cold to her the few times she went over. And that was when we even had the air conditioning turned off. Her grandmother's house, however, always felt so warm and safe. However, her grandmother's old house in Michigan was a very, very different story. When Terry was about 4 or 5, she and her mother had moved in with her mother's parents for a while. Terry didn't really like the place because of how strange it felt, but she did like her grandparents and enjoyed staying with them. At least, until one incident late one night. Terry had been put to bed in a spare room that was to be her own for the duration of her stay. She wasn't used to being away from her mother, but with assurances that both her mom and grandparents were in their own rooms right down the hall if she needed anything, Terry was able to settle into bed. Or at least, she tried. For some reason, she just could not sleep that night. It hadn't been the first new place she was in, as her mother enjoyed traveling with her when Terry was young. However, none of the hotel rooms or apartments that she ever stayed in to that point had made her feel so uncomfortable. It was like there was something there, some sort of pressure that made her skin crawl. Terry turned over at one point to face the doorway leading into the hall. The door was wide open, and she could still see well due to the light being on at the other end of the hall, just in case Terry needed to find her way to the bathroom during the night until she got used to the layout of the house. She didn't understand why, but Terry found herself staring at the opening. She wasn't sure why she could not turn away, but something compelled her to keep her eyes affixed on the entryway. It was as if she could feel something was about to happen. And she was right. Within moments, she could see the figure of a young girl about her age slowly creep into view. For a moment, all she could see was half the girl's body, because she had just stopped in the hallway without coming all the way into view. The girl just stood there for a few moments, and Terry couldn't figure out for the life of her who she was. Of course, her grandparents had a lot of friends and a huge family, and it was very common for people to stop by at random for a visit. Was this girl a cousin she had yet to meet? Or was she perhaps the daughter of one of her grandparents' friends or neighbors? At that age, Terry hardly knew a stranger and was inclined to socialize with just about anyone. Yet when she saw this girl, she became frozen to the spot with fear. The girl wasn't looking at her, yet Terry found herself wishing she could burrow down into the mattress to get away from her. She couldn't understand why, only that she really, really wanted the girl to go away. She was just about to ease the covers over her head and pretend she was asleep when the girl took a few steps forward, causing Terry's eyes to nearly bulge from their tiny sockets. Embedded in the back of the girl's head, nearly splitting between her two blonde braids, was a hatchet. A scream welled up inside of Terry, and the girl turned to face her, allowing Terry to see the rivulets of blood spilling down her face, and notice well the dark splotches that had collected onto her clothes. Terry squeezed her eyes shut and screamed, clawing her way back toward the headboard of the bed as fast as she could go, all tangled up in her covers. Within moments, her entire family was in the room trying to calm her down, but even after Terry's mother moved her child into her own room to stay with her, Terry could hardly be consoled. In the end, most of them wrote off Terry's experience as a night terror, perhaps brought on by her sneaking a peek at a movie not suitable for children her age. Of course, Terry hadn't yet seen any such movies that would have involved hatchets to the head, but she could hardly convince the others of that. After all, no murders or accidents involving children of that age had occurred on the property the entire time they owned it. So why would an apparition like that appear in their home? Of course, the house itself was very old even when they bought it, and who knows what could have happened on the property long before they had it. The rest of the time Terry was in that house, she refused to go back into that room. Shortly after, her mother got a job in another state, so Terry and her mother moved. They would move to a few more places before eventually moving down to the town where Terry would spend the remainder of her childhood and meet me. Up until the day she told me this story, Terry swore that few places she ever stayed in were as bizarre and terrifying as that little house.